All right, good evening. My name is Matthew Daly. I am Vice President for the Board of Trustees for the Grand Rapids Historical Society. And I wanted to welcome you again this evening to another presentation as part of our speaker series for January. And this evening, we're doing something new. We're on a webinar, so we don't have to tell everybody to be muted and all that good stuff, which makes it a lot more pleasant. So this is excellent to be able to do that. Tonight's speaker is Tom Bittner, and he is a resident of Caledonia, Michigan, and he has done a host of presentations for the Grand Rapids Historical Society, including Mackinac Island cottages for the rich and famous. He has a huge number of presentations and a very, very broad range of interests. So there's a seemingly limitless number of opportunities to have Tom talk. So it's great to have him back. Tonight's presentation is looking at why 27 million attended the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and Michigan's contribution. So this is our presentation. Again, we'll be doing questions at the end. We'll be using the chat function as well. So feel free to enter questions in the chat function, and we'll be on our way. So Tom, thanks for being here, and it's all yours.
And if there's anything we can help you with, Tom, just let me know.
I'm trying to get my screen on there, right? And you see it?
Yes, we've got your slide up, the why 27,000 million attended the 1893 Chicago's World Fair.
Yep.
It should be starting now.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this exciting journey to the past. We start out here showing all the officers that did the great work in getting it all together. And again, it involved getting 27 million people to visit in one summer. And Mr. Burnham that you see right in the center top is the one that worked for 2 years to arrange everything, including hundreds and hundreds of plumbers and construction people, and you name it, he had to do. He lived in a little shack out in the middle of the grounds and had a hold of his wife nearby every night to assure that everything was all right, because he had to spend his entire time. So these are the officials that did the actual working on it. And this is the land in Jackson Park where it was held. The fair itself was right around here. You'll recognize the Museum of Science and Industry, what you know today is in that area. And the Grand Midway was right across to the left, that horizontal line. That was called the Placent. And that's where you had all the rides and all the carnival. As a matter of fact, the word Midway came from the fair itself, because it did have all this entertainment in there. So this is a map of it. I'm going to go back in some little dark history of Jackson Park. If any of you have been to Jackson Park, back around the Civil War time, there was a very big Confederate prison camp right on the shorelines of Jackson Park there, and was compared to Andersonville as to number of Union soldiers that died there. As a matter of fact, about 4,400 soldiers in the 2-year period of being in prison died in the spot in Jackson Park, and many of them disappeared into Lake Michigan and so forth. So that's why it got its kind of comparison with Andersonville. Most of them died from a disease, but others from other causes. So that was the first part. And the second part was when we had the Chicago fire of 1871, which was a mammoth fire. Of course, you all heard about Miss O'Leary's cow. The fire burned 4 miles long and 1 mile wide, destroyed 17,500 buildings and 73 miles of street. and they had about 300 people got killed. So with this background, here the officers were getting together to plan this great fair, only 12 years after the Great Chicago Fire. So we'll get started on that. And this is what it looked like when it was all built up, ready to go in 1893. We'll go through everything. You see the big building in the foreground is the machines and liberal arts building, and we'll just follow all along so you can see what it looks like again in 2 years, getting all the plumbers, electrical people, carpenters, everybody together to build something, and that is truly amazing. And you'll see that when you see the program. It just so happens at the time they were also having a Pullman riot over in nearby Pullman, so that left a lot of jobs open for this. So this is the layout of it, and we'll get going. Landscape architect was Frederick Holmes, and he, of course, was the one that designed Central Park in New York. He was the most distinguished person to visit the city for this particular project. And this is what he had to start with, a bunch of scrub, a lot of water. He found out right away that this has to have a water theme because of the fact that it's almost in a swamp. So as you see, as they designed it along there, would be a lot of canals and ponds and so forth. And he did a marvelous job in doing that. And here they are going to work with the mules and the equipment and so forth, and trying to make it into a very beautiful park, which they did in 2 years. All of them, and they had a shovel by hand. There was no steam shovels at that time, and all this was had to do by hand. And what made it hard, of course, was the fact that they had a lot of canals and ponds in order to facilitate the design that they had there. A little bit about the fair. The fair was to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival in New York in 1492. Chicago bid against New York, Washington, D.C., and St. Louis, and got the honor of sponsoring the exposition that you'll be seeing there. Daniel Burnham and Frederick Law Olmsted were the ones that really supervised the entire thing. Covered 600 acres, 200 new buildings in 2 years, predominantly neoclassical architecture. And the people, as we indicated, 27 million people visited, and only 1/3 were national people. 2/3 were from foreign countries, if you can picture that. 2/3 of the people that visited, out 27 million, had foreign languages, but came from Chicago. Dedication was in October 21st in 1892, but the grounds didn't actually open until public until May 1st, 1893. And the fair continued and started really it continued to October 30th, 1893. So within those few months, they got 27 million people, which is quite an establishment. 46 nations participated in the fair at this great World's Fair. So here they are, all working with their wheelbarrows and digging out the bonds. Again, you got 2 people continually supervising that, and all these thousands of workers were working and putting it together. Of course, the logistics, they had hundreds and hundreds of railroad cars of lumber, tons and tons of nails. It's just unbelievable. But these were the plans that they had for the buildings. The buildings were designed by, the idea of the buildings were designed by French architects. So you see they're reflected in all the buildings they had there. They were all basically on, so here they are. They used plaster of Paris and straw to build all these buildings except for 2. The largest building will be the big one you see in the upper right. And that'll be the biggest covered building in the world at the time that was finished. So this is, you can see they're carrying out the ponds and the canals as Mr. Olmsted designed it. And you can see the building starting to go up big building in the back there, which is the machines building, is the tallest building in the world at the time, 9 stories high. And to keep in mind, there's no cranes or computers or anything else making it. It was just by, and this is what it looked like when it got done. You see the canals, you see the manufactured buildings in the back there. And we'll be visiting that just a little bit later. Now, the people that came there never saw anything like that in their life, as you can imagine. This was before there were automobiles, before there were airplanes. This was strictly when people still had horse and wagons and buggies, and that was their means of foundation. And here they are leaving work. You can see the shells of the building in the background there, and they put in a full day's work. Again, keep in mind that somebody had to supervise the thousands of people working there to make sure it got done in 2 years. And this is how they made it. They just had plaster Paris and shaft, and all the buildings are made to be torn down at the end of the fair, all 200 buildings except for 2. And this is exactly how they designed it. Workers and staff, here they are mixing it all together, so they have the material to build the buildings they needed. Artists, they brought in artists from Italy and from France to come there and do the plaster Paris sculptures that you see right over there. They had their own statues, their own place to work. And magnificent. Look how big this is. This is one of the facades of the buildings. And this one here is basically 4 stories high, made out of plaster Paris, and with the artists up there and ready to be put in the front of the building. It's just an amazing thing to see. This building you recognize, the World's Congress building, was built in order to simplify and to help build the fair as it was. They had all their offices there for the architects, for the purchasers. That's the reason that this building was built. Later on, of course, we'll find out that after the fair, that they made that into the Art Institute of Chicago. Well, Naval View in New York started right away. And here's you see Columbus ship replicas and some of the military ships. This was in New York. They were so excited about the World's Fair. They had this festival of ships that you see right over there. New York, look at the parades they had. This was for the Chicago Fair. Got everybody together. People had never seen parades like this, thousands of them. And they all came to celebrate the opening of the World's Fair. Truly amazing, bigger than they had at the Macy's Santa Claus Parade. This one here was taken over in Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And see all the bunting up there, all the people watching the parades as they, and notice they do have horse and trolleys there. Again, this was before they had any modern motivation. This one was taken on State Street. And again, you can see all the horses out there, all the viewers on the back. They haven't seen anything. A lot of people dressed up on the side there, just excited about seeing what is happening. Another arch around the city. Everybody had the whole city. And keep in mind, 12 years earlier, downtown Chicago was in ruins. And in 12 years, this is what they came up with. Well, finally, they had the dedication, and President Cleveland was there. And the dedication was 6 months before the fair actually opened. And so they had a festivity going on there. They expected 72,000 people to attend. And unfortunately for their logistics, there was more than that. But all to see President Cleveland. He actually used electric microphone in order to give a speech. Now, one of the big rules, and you're going to chuckle at this a little bit later, but there were no military facilities, people, armor, anything was supposed to be on the fairground. This is a non-military type of thing. So they did have them for starting out. These are the policemen with their rifles. They had that in the dedication parade, but supposedly they wouldn't have that at once the parade and the fairs got started. So here it is, the big album. You might have seen those in the antique shops or in museums and so forth. This was a big album they made for Chicago for 1893. You might wonder why Columbus came here in 1892 and it's 1893. That's because it took an extra year to put this all together. So we'll forgive them for that, because when we see what we see, it's quite amazing. How do you like to be caught in this traffic jam? State Street in Chicago. See all the trolleys there, horse-drawn trolleys, and all the materials being pushed back and forth. This is what you had to fight in order to get over to see the fair on the south end of the city. And here's where they got on. The main thing that was not damaged during the big fire was the railways. Railways were not damaged. So here you see the Illinois Central Railway on the lakefront. And this is all the people got in the cars that they called cattle cars. And you can see why. All these thousands of people going in there. And you might want to see, I'm kind of in the way there, but on the top of the building, they have Studebaker advertised. And the reason why they had Studebaker advertised is that they actually built the most carriages in the world at the time over in Indiana. So they were the big maker of the Studebaker buggies. So that's why they would be advertised there. Rival, again, they were in these, just punched in there just like a subway of today, I guess, all excited to see the affair. And this is what it looked like. Again, there's a manufacturers and liberal arts building. We just talked about the largest building in the United States. It's covered at the time. And over on the left, you see the Fine Arts building. That's now the Museum of Science and Industry. And so we're going to start in the upper right, agricultural machinery, and go in the circle and visit all these places individually. I will point out all the railroad tracks that came in on the bottom right, because that's for the transportation building as we'll open up, and we'll see that just a little bit later. Well, has anybody ever heard of the architect, Mr. Sullivan, that created the first skyscraper? This was his handiwork. This is all plaster and all beautifully designed. He designed it specifically for the fair there. So this is the first thing you would see when you came off the train and they paid your admission and got inside the fair. And this is the outside of it. Again, that's Mr. Sullivan. He made this beautiful building. You can see all the people here had their top hats on and their suits, and the young ladies have their long skirts. They're all excited to see the greatest fair on earth. And again, this is another view of it. The train that came in there followed the green line that you see going through the thing there. And what they had is the first electric elevated. Before New York, before anybody else, that was the first electric elevated following that green line through the fair. It turns around, it comes back, it goes approximately 3 miles. And it was the most exciting thing that people saw. Before that, they used the steam trains on the elevated up to the time of the World's Fair. And you might recognize a steam engine like this. This was used in logging in Michigan. They didn't know what to do with the logging trains in Michigan after they were done logging. They say, why don't we give it to the elevated? So that's what they did. And later on, we got to the electric elevated, first one in the country. And this is how the track was laid out when they came into the station. There it is, very first electric elevated in the United States. And people were just thrilled to death just to have this electric. It was built the same as the L's today. They had a third wheel. And thanks to Mr. Tesla, who invented alternating current, they were able to do that. If you look in the background, you see all the mills, windmills. That was one of the exhibits, all the great windmills for utility use in the country in the time. And that was a separate exhibit by itself. So there it is. People enjoy the very first electric elevated train in the country. Or if you were coming by the usual wagon and horse, this is where you would get your tickets in order to go into the fair. And these were the tickets. They were very colorful. They usually stamped on it what particular type of event was sponsored at particular time. But if you're lucky enough to get a hold of them, this is what they would look like. And here's the administrative building. And this building is the say-it-all building in the fair in height and so forth. But this is where they did their administrative work and so forth. And the design was suggested by a French architect. And that's what it is. Again, built out of cement, plaster of Paris, and shaft in this building, including the sculptures on the building there, the administrative dome. Again, all the big winged statues and everybody plaster of Paris. Just truly amazing. They did it, and that's what they did. Well, here's the Columbian Guard. They look very impressive. They didn't do a thing, but what they did do is make sure that nobody did anything they shouldn't be doing, because they couldn't speak languages of the people there, and they were just told that you just walk around the fair and make sure everything's ordered. But basically, they didn't do anything but make sure that the people were on the straight and narrow. Here's one of the first buildings to go up, the agricultural building. Just try to figure out how much lumber, how many nails, and plaster of Paris you needed to put it up. And there's the big lagoon that was a design suggested by Mr. Olmsted. And here's what it looked like when it was finished. Beautiful, beautiful plaster of Paris building, agricultural building. You can see the people milling it down. Most of them have top hats and coats and so forth. The reason for that, of course, in those days, this was more the upper class type of admission into the fair, and a lot of people couldn't afford it, so you won't see people other usually than the top hat and the coat and enjoying the fair. And here's the Michigan Pavilion in the agricultural building. Of course, a lot of people think of Michigan today, automobiles, airplanes, and everything else, but in fact, it was an agricultural state that competed against many, many different states across the country, corn, oats, rye, everything, buckwheat, timothy. These were all put in competition with the other states that did the same. And this is a very fine section of the building where they got the recognition that they should have. And here's the great Court of Honor. Just amazing. Again, this was all sculpted out just as to Olmsted's plans. We'll see later, they got fountains on both sides that were run by electricity. But if you followed the lagoon straight out to the building in the background, that went into Lake Michigan. So you could get off of Lake Michigan as a member of the visitor to the fair, come through the archway, and then enjoy the rest of the lagoon that you see right over there. One of the plaster of Paris things, this shows the spirit of the fair was progress, and the culture was what it was, and this was supposed to recognize that. Statue of Industry, beautiful. Again, if you went out through that arch, it'd be on Lake Michigan. The goddess that you see there is about 90 foot tall, and she's covered with gold, gilded gold all the way through, and she was the Statue of Honor. And they, as we'll see later, they didn't make a model of it. She didn't last all that long, but the Statue of Industry and the Statue of Plenty. And again, you see the gold gilded statue of the goddess up there, and you can see where the boats would go out of the arch and get a cruise on the Lake Michigan and back. Electric boat ride. Whoever thought of electric? Well, we find out Mr. Tesla did just before he came here, and he invented alternating current, and things started taking off in a electric fashion. There's that statue. You can see the people in their electric boats kind of milling around, and that huge statue, beautiful. Again, everything you see, plaster of Paris. Mr. Hershey went over to Switzerland to get some chocolate machines, and here it is. The chocolate pavilion is what they call it. And you want to bet there's a lot of people that when visiting there, various chocolate that they had in the country, in the big pavilion, advertising again with Mr. Hershey. Got the idea. I'm going to Switzerland. I'm going to start selling Hershey. He did pretty good. He's still on the top today. And here's that gateway to the Lake Michigan. You can see the statues, and you can see the 5 horsemen on the top there that was represented from artwork that was made back in the Grecian times, and that decorated the top, plus the decorations you see there. Plaster of Paris pillars. Did you ever see anything like that? Designs on the top, perfectly straight. And this is what you were going around that pericle, around the end of the pond there. So this, I mean, if you got off the electric train and got here, you would just in awe. You couldn't believe what you're seeing. Big ponds and the boats and the beautiful buildings. All the buildings were white, which of course, that's why they named it the white thing. That's because of the outside that they use on there, the white city. And it literally glistened in the sun. If you ever heard that patriotic song that talked about alabaster majesty, this is the alabaster majesty that he sung about. My country to thee. Columbus at the machinery hall. Again, those big majestic pillars there, they gave you seats to rest on if you're worn out already. And believe it or not, this was made back in 1893. This is the propeller for the boat, German boat, ship that they were making, passenger ship, and they put this on a display in the machinery building. That was in 1893. They made massive items like this one. So this all takes you over to the machinery room. You're going around to the left and about halfway up to the left there to the next building. That's and that is the one by Mr. Louis Sullivan. Now you can see this is the only building in the fair that's modern, colorful, and up to date. He did not believe in all this type of architecture that they use in all the buildings. He thought it was too ancient, too old. He wanted to reflect the present, so this is what he built. Mr. Louis Sullivan, the inventor of the skyscraper. He was the one man out. He says, this is what we're going to have for the transportation building. And here's your transportation, horse and buggies. So these were the latest buggies, and I'm sure the horses have been around quite a lot earlier, but this is what it looked on inside. They're not looking at cars or Ferraris or Model T Fords. They were looking at the finest horses and buggies. And guess whose this is? Mr. Studebaker. That his wagon, it's colored in gold. If you want to see that today, it's at the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana. And this is his beautiful work. He made over 70,000 wagons, a lot of them that were used in the Civil War. But this is the kind of a centerpiece for the entire buggies that you see over there. You want to go on a ship? Well, they got a design there for White Star and some of the German shipping companies. This is American Line steamship. If you were thinking of taking a cruise next week or something, this is what you would see. This is what your room would look like. They got the cloth, like a wallpaper on it. You got 2 portholes, one of which opens, and fancy beds and tables and so forth. So this would be your cabin if you were in one of these luxury steamboats in those days. Hopefully you weren't on a Titanic, but many other ships did very well. Well, this is going right down to the machine room on the middle right. You see the machinery. And then we're going to go over to the transportation building in the back. All these railroad tracks were built to go into there and see all the different trains that they had at the day, which were the trains, of course, in those days were the airplanes of today. Everybody took a train when they're going any place. So you see all these rail sidings, all made for the fair. And this is what they had, the British locomotive Queen Express. That was shipped in all the way from England. Beautiful train and certainly very fast. And even today it is a very luxurious and speedy locomotive. New York Central had the 999. That was the fastest train in United States that went over about 120 miles per hour. If you want to see that exact locomotive, you go to the Museum of Science and Industry, and they have it on display there. That's one of the most famous locomotives made here, and that's the locomotive 999. It set the speed record in the United States. War Engine General. There's a lot of reading you can do about this one. This was a survivor of the Civil War, and it was refurbished, and it later on it visited almost every city in the country. The grand war engine that served the Civil War, and it still goes around today, the War Engine General. And by the way, in the Ford Museum, this is the engine that brought in the president and Mr. Ford for the dedication of the Greenfield Village, the General. John Bull, at the time, was the strongest, was the fastest locomotive at the time, and that was there as well. This is just a cross-section of what they had. Dewitt Clinton of the New York Central. This one is now in the Greenfield Village if you want to see it. If you wonder why the English called the passenger cars coaches, just look in the back of the train. They are literally stage coaches with railroad wheels on it, and they put their baggage on the top, and that's why they call those coaches. Dewitt Clinton, that ran on wood. Look at here. You never go back to an airline. It's luxury by Pullman. Imagine how many people had to work on this, how many were artisans to craft all the top of the car, the furnishings, everything. This came from Pullman. This was called the Palace car. And this is what rich and famous, this is a car that they took to Chicago, California, any place that they wanted to go. Curved glass. They got the sofas on there. Again, all the decoration on the top. This was your airliner of 1893, and people just were overwhelmed by what they saw. Well, we're going to go from the transportation building, and we're going to head a little bit to the south, and we go to the music choral building, and this is where they had the orchestras, the singers from across like the Menden Corps. This is where they performed. This is a music hall. This is what it looked like inside. Plaster Paris pillars. Look at all the seating they have. Seating for hundreds. And this is where the Menden Corps type of chorus or orchestras perform at the thing. You'll find as you go through there that you might have one specific thing you want to see, like music. And here's what you wanted to see right there. Then we get over to the agriculture, the floral building. This is one of the buildings. They did have several they were still working on when the fair opened. And you can see here on the conservatory building, they're still working there as the people were working along. But again, in amazement, they see the palm trees and all the vegetation that they have in there. Women's building, God bless them. This is where the women came out. This is the first group of women in the country that actually actively took part in designing the buildings in the fair. And then this is the women's building. 12 women in the country they helped to put together. Here you see all their people right there. They were activists. They weren't, there was a split at this time between the activists, the ones that actually got things going, like you see to the left, and the people that believed that women's place was in the home and there was a split down the middle. They say, why should these people be strutting around when they should be taking care of the kids in a home? So there was a split, but the fine people, including some right here from Grand Rapids, helped plan this conservative this exposition, and then was the first one that had the input of the women, as you see right here. Now, for those that believed in the domestic part, this is the what they call the children's building. And there they are. These are real babies that people that are visiting are working there, and let the ladies there take care of their young ones. And this is their nursery. This is a children's school. Children of the people that worked at the fair, they got the schooling there in the children's building. This one I enjoyed, a kitchen garden, children's building. You know what they're planning for in the future. They got their brooms and their gowns and so forth, and getting trained for to take care of the facilities and when they get back home. So we're going all the way around about to the top middle. That was the women's building in the top middle. And just as a little hint what's to come on the very top, you see the Ferris wheel. We'll get to that later. But we're going to swing around over to the right. See the mines building. Now, of course, what Michigan was very, very big here was in natural resources, wood and iron and copper, and even some gold in the UP. So this was a miner's building. And over on the right, you see one of the statues that was famous at the time about the Indian hunter. There it is inside, Michigan to your left, the beautiful arch. And you can see that now at Ann Arbor, Michigan, and University of Michigan has that arch there. But this was given the grand center of the building because of the great contributions of Michigan. This is one of the models of the huge buildings that they use up on the UP for copper, and put together this wonderful display so you can see what they look like. And here is a gigantic hunk of copper. And this one here is of over 800 tons, one of the largest chunks of copper that they had there. And I'm sorry, I take 8,500 pounds was the weight of it. One hunk of copper that they brought down from the UP, and all the models that you see of the mining buildings over there was by the biggest mining company in the UP. So that was really something. Really showed off Michigan for great thing, electricity building. Now this is astounding. This is around the center of it. Most people never heard of electricity other than maybe a battery used for something, but electricity was a brand new thing nobody heard of before. And this is the entrance to the building, the electricity building. And guess who they have at the entrance of the building? The gentleman with the kite, Benjamin Franklin. He didn't invent electricity, but he certainly got some out of the skies on his kite. So they thought they would use him. Again, notice the people over there are all dressed up in their finery. There he is, Ben Franklin with his kite. And outside the building, all these are electric pumps pumping the water. Again, nobody ever heard of electricity or electric pumps, but there they were in front of the building. And here's the inside, just ablaze. They had over 200,000 electric bulbs all over the exposition. Most people had never seen electric bulb before, and here they come here. Here's something that's electricity. Westinghouse Electric Manufacturing, Tesla, with the polyphase, which is alternating current. Westinghouse was the inventor of alternating current, thanks to Mr. Tesla. So he beat out Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was still working with batteries, which were very cumbersome, very slow, could only transmit so far. And Tesla came with alternating current, which could stretch across the country. And so he was the one that gave all the light bulbs that you see there. There he is, Mr. Tesla and Mr. Westinghouse. They got together, and they're the ones that beat out the competition in electric. And there they are sitting as, of course, Tesla was kind of like was very egocentric. He's amazing, the things he did, the first power plant. So you'll see a little bit of what it is. He's just like the gentleman, Mr. Hughes, who invented the TWA and so forth. He was very germ orientated. He didn't like germs at all. It's kind of strange. And Mr. Tesla, he only liked certain numbers on his hotel rooms, all this kind of thing. Kind of what we would call odd, but he was a brilliant gentleman that brought us into the electric age. These are the generators that he created that powered all the electricity you see in a fair. And again, people don't know what a generator is. They don't know what alternating current, but they didn't have to because this is designed by Mr. Tesla. And Mr. Edison was pushed back into the background there because, again, if you wired your city up with Edison, you could only have one block at a time before you have another battery, another block. Just these would go about any place. This is the Westinghouse motors, and they're the ones that powered your electricity, including the elevator that you saw a little bit earlier. 1893. This is a type of machining. This is a type of electrical equipment you had already going, even though you did not have the car yet, was not invented. The airplane was not invented, but electricity was, and that's the what shows here. And this is his personal exhibit. He invented neon, and he was the one that did it. What's interesting, I showed this a little while back, and a gentleman came up to me. He said, my grandfather designed that display that you see in your picture there. And I guess he did. His great grandfather lived in Germany, and he set up the display that you see there, Tesla's personal exhibit place. And of course, then you have the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and that was the American Bell Telephone Company. And here's what you needed. This was used for the phonograph or the recorder at the time. That was, of course, Edison's phonograph. Look at all the cables there. The young lady all dressed up, demonstrating how the telephone would be working. And of course, they had electric launches, so you can take their boat along the lagoon there. Well, that takes you all the way to the center of the exhibits. Manufactured in liberal arts. Again, 9 stories high, the largest covered building in the world at the time it was built. And if you think it was easy to make it with wood scaffolds and everything else, you probably change your mind when you look here. All that ironwork that supported that huge building. 2 years, all this was made. And we wouldn't think they were that far advanced at the time. They built the building. There it is. People never saw anything like that in your life. How'd you like to be doing a steelwork up on the top of it? I know I wouldn't. And they even had electric light chandelier hanging from the ceiling, which really overwhelmed the people. Something people had never seen before. There it is with all the exhibits set up. Just showing all the use of electricity, all the different devices that they use there. Telescope, Great Yerkes Telescope, that is now over in Geneva, Illinois, at the college there. But again, there never was, that was the biggest telescope in the world at the time they moved that in. And they did have to take out part of the building in order to get that huge building in there. It was late, but it certainly, everybody, you can see the stairway that kind of winds up all the way to the top there. Stoves. That was one of the greatest exhibits at the whole fair, because this was a time when everybody was starting to heat up the house and cook on stoves. And of course, Garland Stoves in Detroit was the biggest maker of it. There's an advertisement, the domestic Garland happy dog over there. This is a display they had in the building. You can see compared to the size of the people. After the fair, they moved this outside of Detroit to show off the Garland stove and what they make. But guess what happened? They caught on fire and it's not there anymore. All they have left is the metal framework of it. That was there quite a time, kind of showing off Garland. Moving on, we're going to go over to the government building. It shows how it was being put in. Again, you can see how swampy the area was until they finally filled it in like that. This is the government building. Swans in the foreground. They have a redwood stump right in the center and all the art pieces going around there. This is what the displays for the parks that were coming along. And in the midst, notice you got the Columbian guards. They couldn't do a thing if you took them the gold that they had there, but on display by the U.S. government, United States. Now, if you like money, you wouldn't go anyplace else in a fair. You just go right here because it has everything you need. And then they had the baggage cars, the mail cars. You got to see the inside, how they work. That's how you got your mail around the cities, including in Michigan, are designed so you picked up your mail every 10 miles. That's where the station was, and you picked up your thing. And here's your stamps. You have any of these, you're pretty rich. You're in good shape. First stamps. First postcard. This is the first postcard. They had about 10 different designs for postcards. I put this one in. You got the women's building in the background and a young lady over on the left. But the first time they made postcards, and you could send them from the fair exposition and say you were there. So that was the post office, and the post office is getting over to the right of it. Cafe de Marine. How many of you watching here like oysters? This was built by the French for people that like oysters. Look at this building. It's just made out of timber and stucco. And they got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people at any one time that liked oysters or some seafood fish. This is what it looked on this part. This is over in the southern part of the lagoon there. Brazil, look at that building made out of stucco and plaster of Paris. Beautiful, beautiful building for the people in Brazil. Again, there's over many, many other countries participated in the fair. German building. This was one, you'll find out, this was one of the last buildings still standing. There are many, maybe about at least a third of the people in Chicago at the time were German. It turned out later that most of the people in Chicago were Polish, and most of the people were German people were in Milwaukee. But at the time, this is where the Germans set base. This is their building. And then you see the Fisher's building is over on the bottom right. It's put on by Norway. People that like to fish and boats and all that type of thing, they can do that. And Japan. Oh, here we go. All the diplomats from Japan came there when they dedicated the little Japan expedition. There they are, top hats with all their regalia on. Notice that they kind of cheated. The building in back there is drawn in. They didn't finish that building yet, so the postcard gentleman decided to put the building in there. But that was Japan, and that was 1893. We know what happened some many years later, but at this time we were in very good scouts. State building. This building on the south side. You can see where the electric L track is on the bottom. You can take a glimpse of the right in the background that we'll be visiting. The Ferris Wheel we'll be visiting a little bit later. But these were all state-sponsored, the building that you see here. And who got the best position at all? This one was, of course, Michigan. This is the Michigan State House that they had over there. Quite a building, was the tallest of all of them. They had exhibits all the way through the floor. A lot of course, furniture from Muskegon, from Grand Rapids, and showing off. They even had a fireplace they built with a mantel that was 50 feet wide inside the building. It's called the Michigan Building, given the main street in the best position in the state house area. And then you get to New York. Look at this building, just amazing. And those are real lion art pieces on the front there. Plaster of Paris on the inside. This is their inside. It just, again, in 2 years, all the buildings you're looking at were made and very precisely and beautifully made. I'll give you a little hint at the end of the fair that all the plaster of Paris started turning black. It wasn't all that pretty when you were there after the fair shut down, but when it started out, it was glistening white. Pennsylvania State Building, Independence Hall, had the real Liberty Bell was displayed in the Independence Hall. They didn't bring that over here by horse and buggy, that's for sure. So that was the Independence Hall. This is all the buildings over in upper right, what's called the State Houses, and they also had the Art Palace. This is what we know as the Museum of Science and Industry. At the time, it was not. It was the art building that you see there. And this is the front of the building. Now, when you go in the museum now, you come in the back. But this was the front. So you could get off your gondola and go right into the art building. This is the official catalog. Again, if you have one of these and you're doing very well indeed in your collections. And it's laid out just the way you see it today. If you go there today on the left there, that's where the submarine, they put the German submarine in there. But that's looks basically the same as when we saw it. Inside, look at those paintings. A lot of them are originals from all over the world that different countries donated for the fair. How'd you like to be sitting there for 2, 3, 4 hours just looking at those massive paintings that were brought in from France and other countries? I'll give you a little hint. Who do you think made the most money at the fair when it was over? It was the Ferris Wheel. It was not the art buildings that they had there, nor the other buildings you saw. The Ferris Wheel made the money for the fair, but this was certainly glorious. And if you were there to see fine art, then that is what you would be seeing right there. The Dutch department, all the beautiful Dutch paintings there, all original. Again, if you didn't want to see any other part of the fair but this one, this would be the one. And this is the famous sculpture of the hunt, the bison hunt. That is the actual one. And of course, Charles Dickens and Little Nell and L. Well. This is the original sculpture brought from Britain. That was one of the many that you see there. Well, that is, again, everything over on the right. That's the State Building, Michigan Building, and so forth. Now let's get to the beach. Everybody has their bikinis and like bathing wear and everything out there taken in the sun. Maybe not. But, in the background, you'll see a little better. They had the battleship Illinois. We'll see that in a minute. But look at the people. They're probably 95 degrees out there, and they are covered up to keep them cool, I would guess. And looking along the shoreline, you see the buildings over on the bottom right. That is where the electric elevator goes around, and then it starts to trip all the way back. The building that you see over the right is the French government building. Again, you have a nice place on the waterfront to bathe. And notice you have the gentleman that's cleaning up after the horses because there were no automobiles at that particular time. And this is the Illinois. Believe it or not, this is made out of wood. And the reason it was made out of wood is they did not want any military equipment or people on the fair. So to compromise, they made the exact replica in plywood or in wood that you see right there, the Illinois. They had the life-saving station, which was real. They actually had the team from Ludington, lifesaver people from Ludington manned the areas. Again, another place where Michigan kind of showed up. And you had this Viking ship, believe it or not, that came all the way across from Norway, all the way across the ocean, all the way over here in order to show off their fine country. And then you got the Pericles in the back there. The casino was on the little left to bottom. And what they had was a moving sidewalk. There it is. If you're getting on a ship that handled many, many people that wanted to get on a ship, thousands, hundreds of people could get on that moving sidewalk. They had a lot of mechanical problems, but basically at the close of the Exposition, it carried 997,000 people on that chair to get them over to the boats in the background. There it is. You can get on it. They had a lot of problems mechanically. I think it was only the last 2 months they finally got it all working, but there was, your ship would be there and you would get on there. And this was the ship, Christopher Columbus. It looks silly. The first time they was out there, the people laughed at it. They said, that's the silliest looking boat I ever saw. It's got a hollow steel frame on the outside. There it is. World's first steamship. They went between Milwaukee and Chicago, other places, held hundreds of people. The people that were scoffing at it had to bite their tongue because this was the fastest and best ship they had on the Great Lakes. This was the first one ever built. It was inside, it had wood paneling. It also had a big aquarium and lights, electric lights, the whole bit. So this was the Christopher Columbus. There's a little ticket from it if you happen to. There it is, fast. It was hollow like a steel tube. Somebody like it to a canoe. And just sped along on top of the lake, and it served not a good duty. Well, it's a little windy out there. You can see the young people holding on to their hats because they're coming and looking at the La Pita. And that's where Christopher Columbus died in Spain after all his trips he took. It's a motto of the building. Inside, can you believe that? In 2 years, all the building, 200 buildings you saw. They built this one right here. Forestry, here's where Michigan comes in again with the forestry. Colonnade of the forest. And they put all these displays. They took the bark off of all the wood so that you can see the many different woods that came from Michigan. And tell me that didn't take a lot of work to gather that together. And look at here, 50 saw logs, all supposedly on a sled. They cut the logs in the wintertime, and then in springtime, they floated them all to the mills. Well, it turns out that that's way too many logs. They would never be able to pull that on a sled. I think they wanted to drag off a little bit so they can take about 10 logs over there and it'd be more realistic. But they did have the steam trains. Again, if you saw the elevated steam engine at the beginning, this is where they got them all from, the logging industry. Even had a Michigan logging camp with a log fireplace. Here, nobody tell anybody anything, but here's one military building that snuck in. Being that most of the population was German, I imagine that helped out. Krupp gun exhibit, and that was real artillery and their guns that they had there. Little did we know that only a few years later that they would be fighting them. But right now, they had to take these huge guns and load them off the ship right on a pier outside. There they are, how they snuck in. I don't think they were hidden any place. There they are. And we probably bought some of these guns there before World War I. And then later on, of course, they're used against us. But Krupp was the biggest military gun maker in the world. Here we are. We went all the way to the lakefront, basically to the right there. And we're going to go on to the Midway. Again, the Midway was named by Englishmen after seeing what was saying. It's actually a fair. This was the very first fair. And this is the Midway that they had there. Again, that Ferris Wheel is what saved the fair from going under into the red. It brought all the money in that covered all the expenses for the rest of the fair. And the reason that it was designed is that France had the Eiffel Tower in their fair, previous fair, and all the people were thinking of, gee, what can we do to beat the Eiffel Tower as far as the most magnificent thing? Then it turned out that in a chop restaurant one time, Mr. Ferris took out the napkin and designed the entire Ferris wheel, 36 the cabins that you had, the number of seats in the car, the fee, how many revolutions and so forth, 1,000 horsepower. Did all that on a napkin. Now, I don't know what kind of napkins they had, but he did that and he tried to present it to the board. And the board says, nonsense. We're not going to have a silly thing like that in our fair. And we have to come up with something better. Well, luckily, he got the money together. He gave 25,000 and somebody else did. And here it is. This was the thing that beat the Eiffel Tower for a while. Of course, this disappeared and the Eiffel Tower is still there. But the Ferris wheel and had 36 cars, luxurious surroundings, wood paneling, walls, plush revolving seats, and even a little table where you can eat your snacks. It was designed by Mr. Ferris. Shows the size compared to the one they had in Navy Pier. And the size of it went around 4 revolutions. The last one, they would slowly go around and empty everybody, put them on, empty them. So he had 4 revolutions. It was so popular that people bought a fistful of tickets for all day. They didn't care about the rest of the fair. They wanted to see Chicago from up high. That's what he did. George Washington Ferris, he was the one that came up with the idea. He died at the age of 33 years old. And the history of the Ferris wheel is interesting. After this fair, it went to the St. Louis Fair of 1904, and it took me to St. Louis. It here and there, it went without a flaw for all the years it was used. And they didn't know what to do with it. It was perfect. They never had an incident. This was the axle that turned the thing around. Imagine you didn't have big cranes or anything else, but they did it. The irony is that this axle was lost after the fair. Nobody knows where it went. I can't see how that happened, but it did. Here was your big gears. You came in under the gears, and here's what the ticket looked like. You get yourself a fistful of those, and you're good for the day. Go around. You go up the stairs and get on, entrance there. And that was your paneled thing. It had nice cushions in there. It had a little table for your eats. And for the first time, people were able to look at the fair from the air. Look at there. Who designed the wires to be exactly where they are so that they didn't break? As a passing note, by the way, I have a friend, Harold Woods in Rockford. He just built one of these 5 feet high, exact duplicate of this fair. He was going to put it in the fair that we had in Grand Rapids, and of course that never came. So he's going to have that display in the bank, I think. But he made a 5-foot replica, including everything you see there. And this is the view you get from the front. A little bit of smoke from the steam engines they have out there. So this is a fairway. This goes out to the end over there. Cracker Jack. I'm sure a lot of you had Cracker Jack. It says slide, Kelly slide on top of the box, and why does it do that? Now comes the open season for baseball fans and good old Cracker Jack. So it was invented by the fair, and you didn't go to the ball game without Cracker Jack, and that's where that came from. Balloon rides. Got a beautiful balloon ride at the city. And one of the very dark spots of all the fairs is they put the natives into exhibition to the people, just like animals. This is Sitting Bull's cabin. This is Rain in the Face, one of the last real chiefs. He was made to sit there all day to show off the Native American thing. People brought in from Syria, young lady all dressed up. The interesting thing is they didn't want the camels and Syrian people to be on it themselves, so they had to stay in a schoolyard that's about a few blocks away from the fair, because they might do something bad to the fair. But they were involved in the reenactments of Syrian wars. They were popular. They were very, very popular. And Little Egypt. Of course, the Egyptians came in there and made these beautiful buildings you see here. If you didn't care about the rest of the fair, you had Little Egypt. Then you had the Germans. I saw this name on there. It says Forsheim on the beer unit here. I looked it up. Forsheim was a watchmaking company in Germany. And during the war, it was bombed 5 or 6 times by the British. They thought they were making machines for the weapons, but they were bombed 5 times, that city. Forsheim right there, and they put their name on there. It's at the Black Forest entrance, and you can see them standing there. I don't think they're looking at exhibits. I think they're drinking a little bit of beer there is what they're. But this couple, they had enough beer, and they kind of went on and see all the other exhibits, again, dressed up pretty nicely. This is a German house. They call it a German house. They must have quite a house. That's what it was. How'd you like to have Vienna sausages? Well, it looks sanitary, all right. Must have been go through a Michigan inspection, but probably good sausages to have with the beer that they had right over there. Then they had these other exhibits on the Midway. This is to see the action of the volcano in Hawaii, and they probably had bursts of smoke and noise and so forth. Anybody that wanted to see that. And then they had a panorama of Bernese Alps. You go inside, they had a big mural going all the way around, so you felt like you were in the Alps. Oh, this one I love. The World Congress of Beauty, 40 ladies. And I wouldn't think that all these men are lined up in front of the door to see their latest fashions. I think they're more interested in seeing the 40 ladies over there. But that was a popular booth right there. And all these young ladies dressed up. And some of the members that ran the fair was afraid there'd be too much hoochie coochie over there, but I guess that was kind of overlooked there. And then you had the Marine building, which is Natatorium is what they call it. And they demonstrated the use of diving equipment in one part of the building, and they also had swimming pools in the other, if you want to do a little bit of swimming. The Naval Castle. And this one, probably some of you will have heard about Hagenbach's Menagerie. And Hagenbach from Germany had this huge building for more or less a circus type of view. Everybody go there to see the animals that he has there. He actually kept lions on cages on top there to bring the people in. I'm sure the lions weren't too happy about it. As a matter of fact, he had a lawsuit in Germany about treatment of animals, but that's Hagenbach. That was certainly very, very popular. Hagenbach trained 2 million people admission to see the animals, 2 million to see Hagenbach trained animals. This is a German castle. Amazing. 2 years, 200 buildings. There's a chapel and a German building. And one of the big things there that they had was, by the way, just as a side note, Walt Disney's grandfather helped construct some of the fair, if that means anything. Elias Disney was a gentleman that helped build it. Well, what they had here was the military school of young boys from Michigan. And they did a lot of demonstration as far as the marching around, impress the people. And they came from Michigan and were really elite. They even taught them how to ride horses. And there they are right there. And again, no military on the fair, but here's their tents. They all kind of kept out there on the fairgrounds. And John Philip Sousa was there for the graduation class. I believe the school went out of business around the 1930s or something, but John Philip Sousa, you all heard about him. He was the one that, then they had the Chicago Day. 275,000 in one day came to here to celebrate Chicago Day. They also had a Michigan Day, Indiana Day, but 275,000, again, keep in mind that the city burned down about 12 years ago. Chicago Day, there's a ticket you had there. One day only. 275,000 people came to celebrate Chicago Day. Boat Parade, Transportation Day. One very unfortunate incident, this is their refrigeration building. 4 firemen were caught in the fire and didn't survive it, but it's one of those things that happen when you have a fair. Here's a real good one, Buffalo Bills Wild West. If any of you think this wasn't popular, they wanted to join the fair. And the Exposition says, we're not going to be disgraced by having Buffalo Bill and his reenactments. So they didn't. So he built next door and he made a ton of money from the people from the fair, just being by next door and having his Buffalo Bills. Well, again, here's the Syrians. They were put on a school property to tent out because they didn't think they were good enough to have in the fairgrounds. And then scientifically, you got this huge searchlight. If it's used, it could be seen all the way across the St. Joe, across Lake Michigan, a German inventor. And so this is kind of the advertisement picture that I use there. And it had a 7-foot lens on it. And at night, it would shine there and you could see it over in St. Joe at night. And here we are. How many people ever saw a light bulb? And the entire fair was lit up. Thanks to Tesla and Westinghouse. 20,000 bulbs, I think, something like that. Even the Ferris Wheel was lit up. Well, what happened to the fair? That's all the question answered. It burned down. The runners of it, after it was closed out, said, what are we going to do? It's going to be too expensive to tear it down and so forth. And while they're thinking about that, a fire started. Some think it might have been somebody in a station, some hobo or bum or something. Anyway, it burned down. This is what's left of the buildings, plaster and Paris and wood. You still see the statue up there. It still stood so proudly. And they have a recreation of it in Jackson Park. If you ever get Jackson Park, it's only a smaller version of the real. Here's what it looked like. Everything was wood and plaster and it all burned down. Some people were there to watch it. It wasn't the finest thing to watch. This is what it looked like, the fair, 200 buildings after the fire. Well, today or later on, if you go along the shoreline, I kind of like this map because if you look, there's 2 Nike missile plates right along the shoreline where the fair was. And if you look right below it, you see the Museum of Science and Industry and the Japanese island. This is the La Rabida. We saw that a little bit earlier. This is what's left of it today. This is that German building, and it was there for a while. It stayed around. This is that Viking ship that came all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to show off Norway. This is me. If you go to Geneva, Illinois, a Good Templar Park is where you'll see this was being maintained and brought back. Geneva, Illinois, this was taken in 2007. The Little Norway, if you go to Blue Mountains, Wisconsin, they got a beautiful area called Little Norway, and one of the buildings from the fair was brought all the way up there. And then as you look in the map, if you look right in the center, what they had was a Japanese garden or Japanese island. This is where they had the things. They still have the Japanese rocks, the Japanese bridges. And of course, the front of what was the art museum, which is now the Museum of Science and Industry. What they did is after the fair was over, they took all the art pieces and took it to what we now know as the Art Institute. But at that time, it was not at that name. This is where the fair was planned, and now, of course, it's world famous. Our 2 buildings stand today, this one and the one you just saw, Museum of Science and Industry. The rest of them burned down. you walk behind there, you see the Clarence Darrow Memorial Bridge. Beautiful. You couldn't tell there was a fair there. Mr. Olmsted came back and he put it back into the original condition of the park. This is the way it looked, and he restored it. Now here's one of the ponds you would have seen in the fair. That's what it would have looked like. This is what it looks like now. This is what it looked like then. York's telescope, again, that went over to Geneva, Wisconsin, Lake Geneva. Look at here, Tiffany's in the manufacturer's building. They had a display there. Look at that. Tiffany crystal all the way around. And that's in a museum on the East Coast. They restored that. That was an exhibit at Tiffany's. You won't see one like it any place. And of course, at this thing, they had the building. And as far as the Midway goes, if you look from the air, here's where the fair was. The Midway went out to Washington Park. This is what they wanted to do, make that into a boat thing, but now it's called the Midway Appliance Park, right in front of the University of Chicago. And then what happened to these Ferris wheel? As I told you, they shipped the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, in 1904 St. Louis Fair, and it perfectly performed. As a matter of fact, they didn't know how to get rid of it, so they blew it up. So this is what the Ferris wheel looked like in St. Louis. And somebody says part of that bridge is a Ferris wheel is a bridge over in the St. Louis area. And of course, the founders of the museum, Mr. Daniel Burnham, he designed the whole thing, and to thank him for that. He has a stone here in Graceland Cemetery on the north side, he and his wife burial. And finally, at the White City, took over every major city in the country after the fair. Had a White City trying to duplicate the fair. This one was on the south side of Chicago, 64th Street. White City is what they call it. And with that, bring the end of our program. You had an exciting journey down to the fair that was. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yes, thank you, Tom. That was terrific. Please feel free to use the chat function or comments to be able to have some questions for us. And I'll relay those to Tom, and you can get some answers. All right.
That's a good one. This was a great presentation.
Yeah, I agree. What year was the fire, was the question.
Good question. 1 year, well, about 8 months after it closed down. And they don't know how it started. It might have been somebody sleeping there or something, but all it took was a match and the whole thing went down. About eight months after their fair was over. And they didn't mind too much. Again, all that plaster Paris was turning black from all the mildew and all the fumes around there and so forth. So it disappeared quite rapidly, except for the Museum of Science and Industry and the Art Institute.
And what year? What month and year did the fair close in?
Fair closed, and I'm trying to think, around September of the year is when it officially closed down. But I forgot to add, one of the horrible things that happened on the day it closed is that the mayor was assassinated in Chicago. So that put a whole downer on the closing of the fair. But that's what happened. But it was in the fall time it closed down.
Okay.
27 million people.
Yeah, and was it, and the question went on, also asked, was it because they had removed so much material from the fair that it happened, or was it deliberate or accidental? I think.
Well, they're calling it accidental because all the hobos and people homeless, they kind of lived in the area over there. They think maybe somebody in that station had a cigar or something and started over, but it took financially. They were happy to do it. To give you a little bit of the final sheet there, the fair made $25,540,000 is what they brought in, and they made a profit of $2,610,000. So again, most of the income came from the Ferris wheel. They were a little bit disillusioned, but they only made $200 million after the season.
How much was a ticket, and did that allow entrance to all the exhibits?
Ticket, it was 50 cents for one, $5 for a group, and yeah, they could go in anything they wanted. There's no charge for participating in any of that. So.
All right.
Except for the Ferris wheel, you got your tickets for the whole day going around. So,
yeah, there was a question that asked, was Holland, Michigan represented at the fair that you know?
Not specifically, I don't know. I showed in the art building they had Dutch art, but I don't know any offhand specifically from Holland. But if Holland had horses or plants or agriculture or anything, they probably had an exhibit in the agricultural building or the stock area. Oh yeah, one I forgot about the Ann Arbor, which I shouldn't. They had a sanitation building, and they were the ones that invented the sanitation garb and environments for hospitals. It was out of Ann Arbor that they had exhibit. They call it the sanitary exhibit, and that was a high roller too in there. So,
all right. Another question is how is the Field Museum related to the fair? And I think the next question after that is kind of connected. Were only a few structures planned to be permanent? So the first question was, how is the Field Museum related? And then I think, how do they plan out for permanent buildings?
Well, the art building, which is now the Museum of Science and Industry, they really didn't have any use to it, so they moved all the art over to the Art Institute. And in the meantime, Mr. Field wanted to build his new museum. As a matter of fact, I'm sorry, the Museum of Science and Industry was called the Field Museum after the art was out, but he wanted to get closer to the city, so he wanted to be in the middle of the park in the waterfront of Chicago. Of course, Buckingham Fountain and so forth, but no buildings are allowed in that park at Chicago. So he moved it by Soldiers Field because he was literally on the side of it. So the name Field Museum came from the art museum, the original one, over to Field. And then the Museum of Industry was left to rot, literally rot. When Sears came along and made it into the Science and Industry building, it was rot and mold all over. But because it was made with brick on the inside, they had to redo it just like you see it today. So that's what happened to Field Museum. He originally took over after the industry one was made into an art one. Then he made his own museum right on the waterfront. So, but the two buildings standing, Art Museum Industry and the Museum of Science and Industry. So, but if you saw the condition in the 1930s when Sears bought that over, it was just rotting and falling apart, and he put the money into it to make it into an engineering museum. Good question.
Very good. Are there any other questions?
There's a lot of material on the internet and books, every place else. There's more than enough to keep you busy for the next years of your life. It's really interesting.
All right, very good. All right, looks like we've got a couple new messages. So here's a few messages that just came through for me.
Okay.
What is the speculation as to why the two buildings did not burn?
Well, the museum, art museum, was originally built for art originally, and so that was made from the beginning to be a real, lifelong building. And of course, the Museum of Science and Industry, because they had a brick None of the other buildings had a brick wall on the inside. So what they had to do in the museum and science industry, they tear off all the fluff on the outside and they put actual stonework. What you see now in the museum is beautiful stonework around. So the museum, art museum was meant to be around forever. The other museum was the only one that had a brick interior, therefore they were able to renovate it into the great museum that is today.
And then there's another question that says that that asks that you had said that there was a Confederate prison on the original site.
That's right.
Was there a graveyard there that had to be moved?
Ah, that's a good question. That was Camp Douglas. And what happened, I mean, it was, pardon the expression, it was a hell camp. It just everything you would figure in Andersonville, people dying of disease, and they were tortured and everything else at one of the worst museums. So what happened is a lot of them they just threw in the lake to try to get rid of them. But those that survived, they put them into a cemetery over on the north side of the city. And they were there for a number of years, and then they moved those bodies that were at that cemetery to a cemetery just about 5 miles south of the Jackson Park. And so they have a monument, and of course the bodies couldn't be identified anymore, but they did put the remaining bodies in that cemetery just to the south of the museum. I'm trying to look for the camp. It was kind of called Oaks or something. Let me look at that. Yeah, it was in a cemetery, Chicago City Cemetery on Lincoln Park. 1867, the bodies were interred and now moved to the Confederate Mound in Oakwood Cemetery, south of Camp Douglas. So if they want to see the remains of them, they can go to that Oakwood Cemetery, and they have a monument, and they have the area where they moved the rest of the graves over there. That's a good question.
All right, very good. Well, excellent. Are there any other questions? I would direct everyone's attention to the chat feature where there is the library will request a survey for feedback to assist with our programs. So we continue to work to get them better, and certainly our speakers are fabulous, but to make sure that we're able to serve everyone's interests. So we would really appreciate if you could fill out that survey. If there are no other questions, Julie, do you want to jump in?
Looks like one more question came in while
Oh,
you
one
were
more.
just talking, Matthew. So was there a popular fair food that debuted at the fair?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because a hamburger was invented at the fair, and a lot of other things. Aunt Jemima, that was invented there, mostly in the food line. I got a list here. Just a second. Let's see, food. Yeah, I would say the hamburger is the main thing. Cracker Jacks, Aunt Jemima syrup was created there. Cream of wheat, shredded wheat, Pabst Blue Ribbon. Pabst got their blue ribbon from the fair, by the way. Juicy fruit gum, diet high carbonated soda, and as I said, the hamburger, all a product of the World's Fair. And of course, they had the Vienna hot dogs at one booth. I don't know if I eat those or not. So yeah, there was food there.
All right. And one last question. I think this will be the last one for us tonight. What about the restroom situation? How did they handle that?
I'm glad you ask about that. If you hear a Clow, which is a big maker of pipes, CLOW, the gentleman invented the bathroom for a fair. He had 32 spaces in the fair that he put in these what we know as washrooms today. First time in history they had that, and of course he invented that, and company's still in there today. And you can imagine what happened before he had those, but now everything was pretty sanitary. Mr. Clow did that.
All right. Well, all right. I wish to thank everyone for being here this evening. Thank you, Tom, for this
I
fabulous
as well. Yep.
presentation. It's very great. And we look forward to seeing everyone in February and March and April as we go forward with our programs. Keep an eye on your email. Those will be coming through. And thanks again for being here tonight. Very much appreciate it.